Hello, welcome to the Citrus Garden. If you're new here, my name is Christina. If you're not new here, hi, welcome back. It's great to see you. This is a general collective reading. There are no signs attached to it, so only take it if it resonates with you. There may be messages that just don't, and that's fine. So we're gonna get started. I was getting kind of that there's an energy of Mercury retrograde sort of floating around. We're in like the shadow, is that what it's called? I don't know. But anyways, so it is, I think it's next week. I personally have been feeling the effects very strongly. Even now I just tried to like look up when, like, I wanted to get the actual date and like what sign it is. I'm pretty sure it's in Virgo, but not 100%. I tried looking it up and my phone started acting weird, and it has been for the last week. Anyways, so we're gonna get started. Okay, the oil of vitriol. This card is, it talks about a purification process. So you may be going through something like that where you're purifying something. It could be through anger or frustration as well. It could be a person's influence on you. Like maybe there was... perhaps you're working through sort of like, perhaps relationship dynamics where there's, this could be past with the Mercury retrograde. It could be past. It could be something that you're working through at the moment. It could be like existing patterns as well within dynamics, that may be like, because if you, patterns of course are reoccurring. So, and it's not always a bad thing, right? So patterns are what keeps the world spinning, but it's kind of coming through as being like, perhaps there's a pattern that has been perhaps negatively impacting you in a certain dynamic, perhaps. Sorry, my allergies have been so bad the last couple of weeks as well. So it could be certain dynamics. It is kind of feeling like there may be a dynamic or pattern within a certain relationship dynamic that may be sort of like, it feels limiting, like it's like limiting your creativity, or like limiting your choices, or limiting your freedom in some way. That may be becoming known to you, or especially if there's any feelings of like frustration or anger or resistance as well, because it kind of feels like there may be like some sort of goal that you're trying to work towards, or you want to get something done, or you want to like, do something. It could be creatively. We'll get more cards on what that is exactly, but it could be that you're just trying to get some stuff done, but then there's another sort of influence, whether or not that's sort of like in your space currently, or just sort of like residual leftover is kind of how it's coming through. There's some sort of influence that's like, feels like it's trying to limit how you express that. Okay, so an example of this, I was watching the show The Bear, just this last week, season 3. If you haven't watched it, sorry, there's going to be spoilers, but The Bear is a show about sort of like a restaurant, like fine dining restaurants, and like the chefs who run it and that sort of culture. And it follows this story of particularly a family, but there's one dynamic where there's like sort of like the main character, the main chef. He previously worked in like many Michelin starred restaurants and has a lot of experience and all of that. And then he starts collaborating with another chef who has less experience, but is like very enthusiastic and in a way like perhaps a bit more free in terms of like the way that she cooks because she doesn't have experience, right? So that's sort of the dynamic that I'm seeing here. It put yourself into the whatever position resonates with you, but it kind of feels like there's this one scene in the season where they're trying to like, so there's so much. Like it could be that there's like a vision that is not aligning between two people, right? Where it's like what happens in this season is that like the main character suddenly shifts the vision on sort of where the restaurant is going and their goals and all that sort of overnight, and it leaves sort of the partner a bit like reeling, like sort of like having to catch up, like having to shift everything. And it also changes the way the dynamic is run, like the dynamic within the restaurant, the kitchen is run. So anyways, so it could be something like that in a past, doesn't have to be past for you. It could be something that you're currently working through, where maybe there's sort of like some sort of purification process about a dynamic on like perhaps control, right? Like who's in control, who's in the driver's seat, that kind of thing. Or if it's not that, it's just like how, because this is also coming in with sort of like Leo energy, right? We're in Leo season at the moment. There's a lot of Leo energy going on as well about like creativity, of like how you express your creativity, what you give to a situation perhaps, or how you give it, or it is feeling kind of like artistic freedom and creative control. The blood card. That card talks about the physical body. But there's something about that with like the veins as well. Like blood is not just like free flowing through your body, right? Because that's not what we want. What we want is that the blood flows through the veins, and only the veins and arteries, right? The passageways. There's something about that. I'm gonna get more cards, but I feel like maybe there's something about like even creativity has to be structured in some way. Maybe there's frustration around that. It is feeling kind of like a frustration with structure or a lack of it, depending on which situation you're in. Yeah. Lead. That's a tough one. And then Uranus at the bottom of the deck. So lead talks about a starting material. Because in this deck, the alchemy deck, alchemy is about turning lead to gold, right? So it's kind of like this is the starting material. It could be frustration as a starting material, right? If you're frustrated with something, or perhaps with a lack of structure, or too much structure. I don't know. I'll get more cards to clarify which one that is. Because lead is Saturn, this feels like there may be too much structure being imposed on you in some way, and there's frustration about that. Perhaps having to do something a certain way, or having to limit your creative freedom in whatever way that is in order to accomplish something, right? But with the blood, again, you don't want blood just sort of free flowing, right? That would not be good. It kind of just feels like it needs a channel. It needs a channel is how it's coming through. So for all of these cards, these are all materials in this deck, right? Because this deck is split into like planets, colors, the mysteries, the operations, I think. But for this reading, there are only materials. It feels like you have a lot to work with. Is kind of how it's going through. You have a lot to work with, but perhaps no, like... Excuse me, sorry. My nose is itchy. Inspiration, maybe, with the Uranus, though. I feel like it is about to arrive if it hasn't. Like... Sneeze. Perhaps it is about to if it hasn't. Or that there may be sort of a sudden shift that is... providing an opening is how it's coming through. The Unity card for the Oil of Vitriol, that's interesting. I love seeing the Unity card, and I don't love seeing the Oil of Vitriol card. So it could be, like, again, I feel like this frustration, because it is feeling like frustration, or purifying a frustration. And working with it in some way, like perhaps like channeling some sort of frustration into something unexpected. Union, mystical experience, spiritual home. When this card comes up in a reading, it is asking us to remember the mystical concept that we are all one, unified in a holistic universe. It reminds us to look at the needs and goals we have in common with others, and to seek cooperation and community action rather than attempting to do everything on our own. To achieve our goals, we need the active cooperation of others, and to get that cooperation, we must be helpful to them and willing to work with their ideas as well as our own. It suggests that we think of things in terms of equal partnerships rather than in lines of hierarchical authority. Unity also tells us that we have much to gain by remembering our own wholeness. Resolution of inner conflict is often necessary before we move ahead. It is important at this time that we work towards cooperation and reconciliation within and without. Seek the highest good of all involved, and not merely your idea of highest good. Ask for the divine energy of unity to permeate and guide you. Okay, so equal partnership was what I was talking about with this card. It was in that example from the bear, which is, so maybe this is talking about sort of like trying to find a harmonious balance within equal partnerships, and not sort of like a hierarchical structure where it's like one person creates all of the rules or creates all of the menu or like whatever. And instead it's sort of more of a collaboration. Maybe there's frustration because that's not happening, is kind of how it's coming through. Especially with Leo energy as well. Because Leo energy is also about generosity. What can you share with others, and where can you accept help from others as well, is what's coming through with that. Singer of Intuition. I love that card. It talks about sort of like little by little, I think. It's also coming through again with like, again, if you feel like something's not moving fast enough, it's because if it were moving like if you think about like blood, having high blood pressure is not a good thing. It's kind of coming through like that. I feel like there's something that like somebody wants something to move faster, but it's not like physically speaking, because the blood can also talk about sort of the physical body. If it were to move any faster physically, it would not be good for your health. It's kind of how it's going through. Like it would be like really, really taxing or draining in some way. The Singer of Intuition indicates that information is available to us if we will just listen to our own inner knowing. Perhaps we have already heard it and still doubt our subtle senses. The singer says this is the time to really listen to our intuition. What are our feelings, hunches, or intuitions about this situation? It is desirable that we should seek solitude, meditate, and practice stillness and patience. This is a time for inward focus, a time to open the inner door to intuition. There are a lot of ins in this sentence because important answers are to be found within ourselves. The presence of this singer in a spread radiates special illumination and insight on the other cards around it. So, listening to your intuition about perhaps how you feel physically within your body, that may be, it does kind of feel like it is feeling, but also the heart, right? Because Leo rules over the heart. And with the blood as well. It does feel like very physical in whatever way that is. Like, you may be receiving downloads or intuitive sort of knowing through a very physical way. The Laum. That does talk about like stuckness. If you're feeling stuck, especially with the lead card, sometimes it like how to get out of the stuckness. It's to just give a lot of your energy to something. It doesn't have to be a lot. It could just be like a little bit more is kind of how it's going through. So I don't like giving that guidance just because, anyways, I'm going to read what it says in this reading, or in this, in the guidebook. So if you are stuck or blocked in a situation and the Laum turns up in a reading, you probably need to stop focusing on what you are trying to accomplish and simply give to others freely and generously and unconditionally. Try a few random acts of kindness, unconditionally given, of course. Go do some volunteer work somewhere. Mow your elderly neighbor's lawn, or take homemade soup or some flowers from your garden to someone you know who is ill. Give some help to a coworker just because they need it. Give it to a needy stranger, whether or not you think he deserves it. Take flowers into a hospital and give them to a stranger at random, or give them to a nurse with compliments from the universe. Give a bit more than you think you can afford. Go a little further than you think you reasonably can. Empty your wallet or purse of all your cash for a beggar on the street. Don't worry, it will fill up again, much faster than you might expect. Yeah. So especially with the lead card, right? Because this card can talk about like feeling stuck or feeling blocked, or it does kind of come in with sort of like a heaviness, or like not being sure where to start, not being sure what to do. And the answer is just to like give without expectation of receiving anything, but at the same time giving more than you think that you can is kind of how it's coming through. Sorry, there's some noise outside. I'm not sure what that is. Anyways, well, we may have to work through that. Okay, so it does talk about sort of like an act of kindness that goes above and beyond, right? If you feel called to, sometimes that can help with sort of unblocking something. It also is kind of coming through as being like sorry, now I'm distracted by the noise. It does also talk about sort of like if you have given something, let's say, because it does kind of in the description. This one I read a lot because I feel like it's a tough energy for like someone who's perhaps very like empathic and already feels like they give a lot. So paying attention to that, because it does talk about sort of like if you are giving a lot to a situation and you are feeling drained, sometimes it's to pull back, right? So it could be that, because it's like you don't want, with the blood, you don't want the blood to be flowing everywhere, is kind of how it's going through. I feel like I'm speaking to someone who is sort of like working through like how much to give. It kind of feels like they're giving a lot more than they need to, is how it's coming through. So just paying attention to that within yourself. Take what resonates. This is a general reading, but I feel like for like maybe specifically one person, it may be that they're giving too much. It's kind of, and it perhaps is overwhelming to oneself or to the others, especially in that dynamic in the bear where it's like the main character, he was giving so much of his energy into like getting the star, right? Getting the star, right? As some sort of goal. And it could be something here about like maybe someone's really focused on like reaching a goal, or like trying to achieve something, perhaps a vision that you have, or like it might be that, especially with Saturn, because it also feels like somebody's trying to like there's a really big goal or vision and it feels almost overwhelming, or like there's so much to do, but it's like you're at the beginning, so it could feel very frustrating about like, okay, well, we have so much to do, we have so much to work with, like and it's kind of just like it will happen. It happens little by little. It's not going to happen sort of all at once. It's not going to like, because it would be physically impossible is kind of how it's coming through. And I only use that word impossible to describe things that are like physically bound by matter. it's not going to move the pace that you expect it will, is kind of how it's coming through. Okay, Two of Cups. Here's that equal partnership, right? So I feel like it could be a specific partnership for you, could just be any sort of relationship dynamic, because this card just talks to me about like emotional intimacy or intimacy of any kind where it's equal and reciprocal. And also very harmonious as well with the unity. So it does feel like there is sort of like a cooperation or partnership that's happening here. But I feel like perhaps there may just be sort of a purification process of like sort of getting out frustration or expressing sort of needs that are not being met maybe, or like where perhaps someone feels restricted or limited in whatever way that is, and perhaps working through that. Eight of Embers. Because there's two in this card as well, right? I sometimes see, because the way that they're it's kind of coming through as being like a teachable moment, which is interesting. Because this could be in relation to sort of like frustrations. I actually feel like this is not within the dynamic. It actually feels like it's an external influence. Like something that's outside of you that's affecting your path forward, right? It might not be frustrations within the dynamic itself. It may be sort of like external factors that are somehow impeding movement. This morning some sort of something happened. I was gonna go out into the backyard, and I opened the screen door and just saw like this like flurry of very small movements, and it was this huge spider web. It was like one of the biggest spider webs I've ever seen. Had been built like just like a foot in front of the doorway. It had like this one long strand going all the way across sort of like the deck. And the spider, also very big spider, like was like scrambling, because I think by opening the door I like disrupted part of the web. Anyways, it kind of just feels like that, like things that are like sort of, for lack of a better word, sort of like building in the wrong place is kind of how it's coming through, or like getting in the way of your path. And it does feel like, in the way that this is coming through, in order to slow you down. Because if you were to move faster, it would be physically really, really either tiring or draining or just not good for your health is kind of how it's coming through. There are factors, perhaps external factors like that are like purposely slowing you down for that reason, is how it's feeling. And that could be very frustrating, especially with the Eight of Wands, because normally Eight of Wands talks about fast movement, right? This one talks to me about sort of like not a great time for movement. That's actually what this is feeling like. Or that there's just like so much chaos, or it doesn't have to be chaos. It just feels like suddenly getting caught in a storm. Protector, the King of Wands. Sorry, I just heard there, like, did you expect it to be all rainbows and butterflies? The answer to that should be no. Anyways, so the Protector. This actually talks about, like, it is actually a good time to dive further into your creative projects, because whatever it is that you're creating is protected. That's what it's coming through with. So it's like whatever it is you're trying to create is protected. It kind of feels like your commitment might be being tested at the moment, just because there are obstacles in the way, or that there are energies around you that may sort of feel like they're interfering in the forward movement of it. Okay, so this is, I had this image a couple of days ago where just imagine with me for a second of, like, if you are on a train going somewhere and you're sitting at the very front of the train, right? And you can see ahead of you, sort of like, imagine it's just completely flat prairie land. There's nothing sort of around. There's no mountain, whatever it is. And you're focused on the horizon. And that's sort of your goal, your destination, all the way sort of like in the distance, and that you're headed towards. All the tracks are leading there, that kind of thing. That's your goal. And I was getting sort of like this download of, like, if you were hypothetically staring at the horizon, your goal, even if you're moving really fast, because of sort of like the perspective, right? It would feel like you're moving very slowly, because it's like the horizon almost feels like it's never getting closer, if that makes sense. Like, it's like, it just feels like it's like, because of the perspective, it feels like you're, as much distance as you're covering, as fast as you're going, it's not getting closer. That's how it's feeling. But however, if you were to, like, sort of take your eye off of the goal for a second, and if you, like, looked around you, right? So not on the goal, but what's around you, like, whatever is going past you would be moving incredibly quickly, right? It's kind of coming through like that, where it's like you are making progress, you are moving forward, but if you are focused on the goal, it doesn't appear that way. If you instead focus on what's around you, perhaps the people or the materials or the things that are on the train with you, metaphorically, it's like the time perhaps, or the experience of time would go by a lot faster, if that makes sense. So it is kind of feeling, so maybe there's some sort of, like, I'm getting the word, like, obstruction or obscurity. Like, not an obstacle. It feels almost like something impeding your vision of it. So it could be that you're not even seeing, like, especially when, like, if you're, like, on a plane, for example, right? Moving incredibly fast, but the experience on the plane doesn't feel like that, right? It's very calm. It doesn't actually feel like you're moving at all, right? Depending on how peaceful the ride is. Anyways, that's interesting. I'm gonna keep pulling cards. What time are we at? 35 minutes. Okay, the Peacemaker. You also have the King of Cups. So, King of Wands, King of Cups. Two of Birds. So this Two of Birds is actually a card about, like, two energies that are not cooperating well because it could be like a lack of communication or like perhaps not a lack, but like a disjointed or like people just focused on different goals. Perhaps it's not necessarily a bad thing. I feel like for here though, it's kind of coming through because you have King of Cups, King of Wands, the Protector and the Peacemaker. It's kind of feeling like maybe this does feel like two people. One who's trying to protect implies that there may be conflict of some sort, and one who's trying to keep the peace. It kind of feels like that. So maybe there's a dynamic where, like, I don't know, are those energies trying to work together? It does kind of feel like there are two different goals here. Two different ideas or like outcomes or intentions maybe about like what two people want are different is kind of how it's coming through. One is trying to protect something, the other is trying to make peace. I feel like that doesn't have to be necessarily a bad thing. It could also be just like two different roles that these two individuals are playing within a dynamic. It could also be sort of like somebody's trying to make peace. The other is determined to protect what it is that they have. Perhaps they're not interested in peace. Perhaps that could be part of why the energy is feeling stuck. Okay, you have 7 of Embers, the Wanderer, 10 of Trees, and the Composer. 1 second. Okay, so it kind of feels like what this Wanderer, I think this is the Page of Wands. There's an energy. It could be a person, doesn't have to be, because it's coming out under the 8 of Wands, where it's kind of like there's an energy here that's sort of like stirring things up. It kind of feels like this is the external influence, right? It kind of feels like there's an external influence that's sort of stirring things up. Again, it kind of feels like a spider energy that built its web right in front of the door. It's kind of how it's going through. That's what this card is looking to me like. A spider that built its web right in front of the door. So it's like you have to deal with that first. It's like it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that as a judgment or anything like that. It's just kind of like that's not the place to build the web, right? Because it's going to get destroyed almost immediately if you build there. So that's how it's coming through. It's like perhaps there, because with the Wanderer, with the Page of Wands, again with the blood metaphor of like just like it free flowing anywhere, it needs a proper place. It needs a proper place. So it is kind of feeling like a proper way to channel the energy, especially with like the 8 of Ember. So perhaps there's someone here where it's like their energy just goes like everywhere. Like it is kind of looking like a firecracker to me. Like I'm going to use the word explosive, but not in a negative way, not as like a negative judgment. That's just how the energy feels with this kind of card combination, where it's like, wild, maybe. It's kind of feeling like a wild, like, explosion of energy that can be really creative, but I feel like it needs a little bit more focus, is kind of how it's coming through, or the appropriate way in which to express that, or like a channel, right? Metaphorically, like a way in which to express that energy so that it's appropriate and not sort of interfering with, like, again, you don't want the blood to be just flowing everywhere. It has to go through the veins and arteries, right? It's that kind of thing. It does feel like an appropriate channel. And like appropriate location. You don't want to build right in front of a doorway, if that makes sense. So it is feeling kind of like the location is off. I don't know what that is, because it, like with the Seven of Embers, right? It's like somebody may feel like it doesn't quite feel like location is the right word. It feels like something doesn't feel solid. Or because of this sort of like wild energy, I'm just gonna use that term, not a negative judgment, just the word that is coming through. Because of the wild energy, like, I'm gonna use like lack of structure or lack of boundaries, maybe, or that kind of thing. It feels like somebody who's perhaps just like perhaps like is learning how to work with a lot of energies, is kind of how it's coming through. It doesn't feel stable because of that. It doesn't feel solid or secure or like consistent. And I feel like with the King of Wands, they're trying to protect this Ten of Trees, because it's kind of coming through. I don't feel like this is, again, I don't feel like this is a negative energy or influence. It doesn't feel like it's intentionally trying to cause harm. It kind of just feels like perhaps it's for some of you, it might actually literally be a child, but it doesn't have to be. It could just be someone who's not sort of like aware of their energy and how it impacts other people, is kind of how it's coming through. Especially with this card, it could be something like that. They're not aware of how their energy impacts other people, and so it just kind of comes out as being sort of like a wild, like a firecracker, or just like metaphorically, the blood is not in the veins, it's everywhere else. It kind of feels like that. So maybe there's someone here with the King of Wands energy trying to sort of like protect something, the Ten of Trees, something that's sort of like very long-standing, very stable, from an energy that feels wild or unstable, or like not steady yet, right? It's like there's still a lot of things changing around this energy. Anyways, then you have, interesting, you have here the Peacemaker and the Composer, because now you have, I feel like this happened in another reading, King of Wands, Page of Wands, King of Cups, Page of Cups, and right in between is the Ten of Trees. So interesting, 2 pages and 2 kings of the same elements. So this could be actually representing the partnership, right? Like 2 people who are kings in fire versus water, and then are in turn pages in the opposite element, if that makes sense. So maybe there is a collaboration that way where it's like King of Cups is having to put out the fires that the Page of Wands is coming in with. The King of Wands is having to help or teach this one how to protect themselves with the Page of Cups. It does kind of feel like a teachable moment. That's what was coming through with the Eight of Wands. It does also feel kind of like it does feel like a lesson, right? But I want to say that it's like not meant to be a punishment is how it's coming through. Five of Lotuses. Yeah. Okay, because I'm seeing this as like, okay, Page of Cup, because we talked about the Page of Wands, right? Like someone who like perhaps is like struggling to control their own energy with the wands. Like it just feels kind of wild or unstructured. Not a bad thing. I feel like that's sort of like a learning phase that is someone's going through, but the consequence of that is that it can feel kind of chaotic versus the Page of Cups, who perhaps is learning how to sort of like perhaps manage their emotions, right? Their emotional energy. And because of that, it's like they can call in floods if they're not careful. It's kind of coming through like that, interestingly. This is such a strange reading. It's like, so it is feeling like a partnership, right? But each one brings their own strengths. One is sort of more fiery. The other is more watery. But it feels like each one is teaching the other their craft in whatever way that is. And because of that, there are sort of like, because the tough energies here are the Five of Lotuses, which is sort of like an energy of like an overwhelming amount of, interesting, because both of these can talk about that. Sort of like an overwhelming amount of energy. One's water, one's fire. That's where Temperance comes in, right? Patience. So I feel like just like the main takeaway, I'm going to get an elemental cards while I'm just talking about that. The main takeaway of this reading is that if you are feeling like there are slowdowns or obstructions in the path, it is because someone within the dynamic is learning something new, and to be patient. And also because as well with like learning things, that does take time. If you learn something too quickly, it also doesn't stick. So it's kind of like learning at an appropriate pace is very significant and important here. And also reassurance that whatever it is that you are trying to create or moving towards the goal, it is protected, right? It is assured, is what's coming through here. It's reinforced. Interesting. It is reinforced. It also kind of feels like this learning energy, because the pages, the way that these pages are like, this reading is very long. The way that the pages are sort of like, it almost looks like these are the defense energies. Not that there is any, okay, I feel like the word defense is not the right thing, not the right word or energy to come through here. It's like, because this stable, I feel like there's an energy of horses coming through, right? Like, either like horsepower or just like steadily moving along the path. Anyways, because this structure in the middle is so stable and secure and solid, it allows for this sort of like experimentation or playfulness or expansion outward, right? Because it kind of feels like there's room to grow because the stable within the center is very strong. So it's like I'm always saying, like, have fun with it. I feel like there's it feels like a creation, but like to try and have fun with it, it feels kind of like there's like explore a little bit about this sort of whatever it is that you're learning here. Yeah, expansion north. This is feeling like an expansion. An expansion that perhaps is requiring a little bit of perhaps the wildness, right? Like it's like having to like explore something new. Perhaps like push your own boundaries of comfort. Endurance rock. This card does talk about protection, right? And endurance and stability. This is like what's at the center, but I feel like there is sort of this energy here of like having to push a boundary of like your own personal boundaries, not other people's. Take that how it resonates. It feels like pushing your own personal boundary of like perhaps what you feel comfortable with. In order to expand, right? And it's like trying to remind you to have fun with it, that like nothing that is created, I'm not phrasing that properly. Everything that is created first is born through a process of destroying something that was before, is kind of how it's coming through. So in this case, I feel like what is being quote unquote destroyed is some sort of like personal boundary or limit or restriction. Perhaps that came from another person, but it doesn't have to. It feels like you're being asked to like push yourself further. The desert solitariness. I feel like that's ending, is kind of how it's coming through. Because we have fluidity, outer core at the bottom of the deck. I feel like somebody is actually leaving this place. Interesting that this is coming through, because this is sort of like the solitariness, the boundary, right? Doing everything by yourself. It is feeling like there's a partnership ahead, or many partnerships, however that resonates for you. Many different collaborations or a community or whatever it is. You're building something, but it requires you to step out of this comfort zone of solitariness. So I'm going to leave it there. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for sharing your energy with me, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.